Where did you get this cute little thing?
Makita asked as she flipped through the blank pages of a red journal with black leather trimmings. Oh, I got it at Grandma's reading of her will. Makita raised an eyebrow at me.
And what did Terrence get?
Terrence was my older brother, and the only other friend I had besides Makita. He got Grandma's coin collection.
Girl, your grandma did you so wrong on this one. Are you sure you were her favorite?
I playfully pelted a pillow at Makita and we giggled. Makita replaced the journal on my dresser and sat on the bed next to me.
We seriously need to do something about Diane and her goons. If it wasn't for Mr. Reed, the janitor, I would still be trapped in the girls' bathroom.
Diane, Gina, and Haley were the meanest girls in our high school, but they were also the richest, which made teachers afraid to punish them since their parents donated tons of money to the school. Yeah, I know, but really, what could we do?
I wish your grandma left you some sort of nunchucks or a samurai sword that we could use against them.
Makita demonstrated some karate moves, and I doubled over with laughter.
Anyways, I've got to run. I've got game night at my house tonight.
Makita rolled her eyes at me before waving and walking out my room. I picked up the book Grandma left me and passed my hand over the edging carefully. Grandma had always been there to listen, and now she was gone. I opened the journal and began to write. It may not be much, but at least I can feel as though I'm still talking with Grandma. A few minutes after writing, I went to bed. What happened the next day was totally mind-boggling. But before I continue my story, hey, I'm Jamie. Have you liked and subscribed to our channel yet? If not, what are you waiting for? We have the most amazing stories here. Also, don't forget to tap that notification bell. If you do, your grandma may give you a book like mine. The next day, while talking to Terrence and Makita in the hallway, Diane and her goons walked up.
Hey, Jamie. Today is such a hot day. Maybe I can cool you off.
Before I knew what was happening, Diane was tossing her large cup of juice towards me. Just then, Mr. Purnell, the principal, walked between us and the juice spilled onto him. There was a harmonious gasp. Then an abrupt silence fell over the students in the hallway as we all waited to see what Mr. Purnell was going to do. He glared at Diane.
My office, now!
Diane glared at me with fiery eyes before she turned on her heels and walked off, followed by Haley, Gina, and Mr. Purnell. I can't believe it, I mumbled.
Can't believe what? That evil Diane is finally going to get into trouble for something?
No, I mean, I think I caused it.
Huh?
Makita and Terrence shared a look, then stared at me. Just then, the bell rang and we went to our afternoon classes. That afternoon in my bedroom, I picked up the journal and opened it and showed it to Makita. After reading it, she looked at me wide-eyed.
Do you think?
I nodded my head and grinned. I took the journal from her and read, Dear Journal, Diane needs to be taught a lesson. I wish that tomorrow when she picks on me, that a teacher would intervene and she would get what she deserves. I had written that down last night out of spite.
Do you think this journal will work for crushes as well?
Well, what happened today may just be a coincidence, Kiki. I shrugged my shoulders.
And I'm okay with that as long as I can be a coincidence with Danny Mason.
She pouted her lips and batted her eyes. We laughed a bit before Makita looked at me seriously.
How about you write in your journal that Danny asks me out on a date tomorrow? You know, for experimental reasons.
Makita grinned. For experimental reasons, huh? Makita nodded. I shook my head and laughed as Makita told me what to write, and I made the entry in the journal. That night, as I nestled between my sheets, I couldn't help but wonder, did Grandma's journal have some sort of magic? While sitting at the cafeteria the next day with Makita, guess who came to pay a visit at our table? Danny Mason.
Hi, Makita.
Makita looked at me with a wide grin on her face before containing herself and turning to Danny.
Hi, Danny. What's up?
Danny looked nervous.
Would you like to go to the movies with me tonight?
Sure,
Makita responded in a high-pitched voice that neither one of us recognized. She cleared her throat.
Sure.
I watched as they exchanged numbers.
I'll call you later.
Danny smiled, and Makita returned it. Danny walked away, and as soon as he was out of earshot, Makita shrieked.
Did you see that? I, Makita Garrison, have a date with Danny Mason. You have to help me get ready for my date later.
While it seemed far-fetched that the journal held any magical possibility, Makita and I made a pact to use the book only for good. Over the next few weeks, Makita and I aced tests, teachers we didn't like stayed at home, Diane and her goons kept to themselves, and I even received a puppy for my 14th birthday. Life was great. By this time, Makita and I were firm believers that the journal Grandma left me had magical powers. I mean, how else can you explain why everything I wrote came true? Not wanting to misplace the book or have someone else read its sacred entries, I wanted to protect the book at all costs, so I decided to carry it everywhere. I found myself writing in it during random times of the day, in class, lunchtime, and even during gym class. Other students probably noticed the same thing, as that could be the only explanation for what happened next. One afternoon after gym class, I looked in my bag. Immediately, I felt the room spin around me. I felt nauseous and my legs felt like wet noodles. Grandma's journal was gone. Makita and I looked everywhere. We even told Mr. Holder, the gym teacher, but he refused to check the other students' bags. It was then and there I knew my life was about to change drastically, and not for the better. And there was nothing I could do about it. At lunch the next day, Diane stood on one of the cafeteria tables and cleared her throat loudly.
My fellow students, in my hand, I hold a book that I find quite interesting.
I turned to Makita and rolled my eyes. What does this spoilt brat want? The rest of my words stuck in my throat as I looked on in horror at the book Diane had clutched in her hand. It was Grandma's journal. Before I could get up, I felt my shoulders being pressed down firmly. On either side of me stood Haley and Gina.
Makita,
Diane looked at her from across the cafeteria.
do you really know what your friend thinks of you and your boyfriend Danny?
I shrugged Gina's and Haley's hands off my shoulders as I attempted to get up.
What is she talking about, Jamie? Dear Journal,
Diane read loudly, capturing the attention of all the students in the cafeteria.
I can't believe that I didn't tell Danny how much I liked him before Makita got a chance to. I wish that Danny and Makita would break up and Makita move away so I can finally get my shot with Danny.
Makita gasped next to me, and I felt my face fall as I looked at her.
Jamie, did you write that?
She had a hurtful expression on her face. Makita, I can explain.
Explain?
Makita pushed her chair back and stood up.
You are really going to try to explain the crush that you have on my boyfriend and the fact that you wish we broke up and I went away? Really? I thought you were my friend, but I guess I was wrong.
Makita grabbed her things and walked out of the cafeteria, followed by Danny. My initial thoughts when Haley and Gina finally let me go was to go after Makita, but I could feel the steam escaping from my ears and my blood was boiling. I turned towards Diane and charged at her. I tackled her from the table and she flew onto the ground. The crowd of students around us began to chant, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" It took a few minutes for Terrence to pull me off Diane. Her shirt was torn and her nose was bleeding.
You'll pay for this,
she screamed as Mr. Purnell walked into the cafeteria and ordered Diane and I to his office. Before obeying Mr. Purnell, my eyes scanned the cafeteria floor, where I tussled with Diane to see where the journal fell, but to no avail. Terrence walked with me to the principal's office and waited for me after Mr. Purnell's lecture. That afternoon, Terrence walked home silently since Makita and I weren't on speaking terms. As soon as I got home, I ran to my bedroom and cried. I didn't know how I was going to make it up to Makita or tell my parents that I got suspended for 2 days because I was fighting. During dinner, I decided not to tell my parents about what happened at school, even though Terrence gave me questioning looks all throughout dinner. I ate quickly before retreating to my room. I was surprised when on the dresser sat Grandma's journal. Who put that there? The next 2 days, I dressed as though I were going to school. I changed in one of the public bathrooms before heading to the ice cream parlor about 2 blocks away, where I stayed until it was time to head home. In the journal, I wished that Makita and I would be best friends again because I missed her so much. For those 2 days that I missed school, each evening I would sit with my phone in hand watching it, praying and hoping for a call from Makita or even a text message, but nothing happened. The third day when I was actually supposed to go back to school, I told my parents I wasn't feeling well and stayed curled up in bed the entire day. I woke up to the sound of someone knocking on my bedroom door. "Come in," I shouted groggily as I sat up and rubbed my eyes. My brother stepped into the room with a bag of donuts in his hand, which he handed to me.
Hey, how have you been holding up these past few days?
I think Grandma's journal is broken. I wrote in the journal wishing Makita and I would be friends again, but nothing happened. It's been 3 days already. I don't understand why the journal isn't working anymore. I bit into one of the chocolate-filled donuts.
What are you talking about? The journal isn't working anymore.
I sighed heavily as I told Terrence about everything that happened over the past few weeks and how everything we wrote in the journal came true.
Well,
Terrence passed his hand through his hair.
I have a teeny tiny confession to make.
What did you do? I looked at Terrence in disbelief.
Well, Grandma's journal isn't really magical. I sort of read it at night, and I did help with some of the things like Danny and Makeda, but the other things, like Diane spilling her drink over Mr. Purnell, were just coincidental. If you really want to make things right with Makeda, you'll have to call her.
I was shocked at first by his confession. It was all him, and pure coincidence? But then I started to think about what else Terrence was saying. Makeda, I could make things right with her. I knew Terrence was speaking reason, but what could I possibly tell Makeda for her to forgive me? As if reading my thoughts, Terrence wrapped his arms around me and gave me a bear hug. It was one of those hugs where everything felt as though it was going to be okay.
Makeda loves you. Be honest, and I'm positive that she'll forgive you.
Thanks, T. I hugged him tightly before we pulled apart. He ruffled my hair playfully.
Call Makeda,
He said before he walked out of my room. I picked up my phone and held it for about an hour, contemplating how I was going to apologize to Makeda and what I was going to say. Suddenly, there was a knock on my door. "Come in, T," I yelled, expecting my brother to walk into my room. My eyes welled with tears when there in front of me stood Makeda.
I heard you were sick, so I brought you some soup. I hope that's okay.
I nodded, and with tears streaming down my face, I jumped off my bed and hugged Makeda tightly. We stood there crying and apologizing to each other for about 20 minutes before we were able to catch our breath and understand what the other was saying. I wiped my eyes and sniffled. "How about I grab some snacks from the kitchen while you put on some music?" Makeda nodded and sat on my bed and thumbed through her phone for a playlist. I exited the room and went to the kitchen where I met Terrence, drinking a glass of juice by the kitchen table. I looked at him curiously. "Did you have something to do with Makeda coming over?" He looked at me, his eyes twinkling.
It's just a coincidence.
I hugged Terrence quickly. "I love you."
I love you too, kiddo.
I grabbed the snacks and drinks quickly before heading back to my room, where music was already blasting. It has been a few years since I've used the book, and Makeda and I are still best friends. But even today, I still think back on those few months back in high school. So tell me, do you think my grandma's journal had some sort of magic in it? Or do you think some things were just a coincidence? Or maybe, just maybe, there is no such thing as a coincidence.